Glad you guys made it to part 2. I'm going to dive right in with this video and get on with looking at CO2 regulators and things you need for your 20-pound CO2 setup. So, when I went up to my local growery and exchanged the 20-pound CO2 tank I bought on Facebook Marketplace for a filled tank, therefore joining their 20-pound CO2 exchange program, I picked up this here CO2 regulator, which is made for a 20-pound tank and necessary to use when running one. So this here CO2 regulator comes with some cool specs at the front here. 40 millimeter high pressure gauge, flow meter, inlet connection. It's with a solenoid valve and a 120 volt power cord. The material is brass. So these are great things to look for when you buy a CO2 regulator. It's also good to note the pressure it can withstand. So it's been pressure tested to 4,000 psi, which is ideal for a 20-pound tank. Let's go ahead and open this here and look inside. So the first thing I see here is a bubble counter, which is really great to have, and the plug, as well as the solenoid, and it's already in one piece, which is nice. So installation will be easy. I also see, when I open this bottom part up, some of the airline tubing that it comes with. Now, I picked up some clear airline tubing, which is fine, but always great to have some extra ones. So I just wanted to go over a little bit more in depth with the specs of this here CO2 regulator model. So first of all, we got the flow meter here, not the bubbler. My mistake, flow meter. And this is 0.5 to 15 SCFH. Here we got the pressure gauge. Good to know. This is good for fitting standard CO2 tanks. We got a plug here that's a grounded power cord. We got the CO2 outlet fitting. So this is where you'd fit on your airline tubing that will fit on there. And we got the solenoid here. And the solenoid's really great to have. And I'll get into the solenoid more in detail later on, but great to look for this when you're buying a CO2 regulator. Also, we have the CO2 adjustment knob here and flow rate adjustments. And this here model only comes with one pressure gauge, which will measure the pressure of the CO2 tank. I'm not too worried about having two. You can always go for two. It's great to have that extra one to measure the actual internal pressure. But I'm just going to measure the pressure inside of my CO2 tank. I think it'll be all right. So that out of the way, now we're going to move on to what else you need for your CO2 20-pound setup. So I bought some more clear airline tubing, which I mentioned earlier. So that's great to have. And also, I just went up to PetSmart and purchased a 3-way gang valve here. So that'll be good for running multiple aquariums on one CO2 tank. That's a really cool thing you can do. You can run multiple aquariums on just one tank, and that will save you so much money and so much time in the future. I also purchased some air check valves, 2-pack, and just some basic ones here. And that will be really great for keeping the water out of the tank if the pressure fluctuates. Really important you guys go for this for any of your CO2 systems and setups, just to make sure that that aquarium water doesn't come back up the tube if there's any pressure changes and affect the CO2 in your tank. So there we have it, guys. That's what you need for your 20-pound CO2 or any pound CO2 tank setup. And I'm going to put it all together and show you guys the finished product. So guys, we set up a 20-pound tank and we attached a solenoid and the CO2 regulator to it. as well as the airline tubing. Everything's perfectly finished. And I want to just bring attention quickly to the fact that my tank lights are off. And this is kind of working into where the solenoid comes in, and my explanation of why it's a really great thing. And I'm going to go into depth about that. So yeah. So here's this full setup, guys. 20-pound tank, C02 regulator. CO2 is on, as you guys can see, the valve's up. And everything's attached now and working well. And here's a CO2 solenoid. But before I bring your attention to the solenoid, before I explain more about this, I just want to show you kind of what I'm running here with this and kind of the full setup. So we have the airline tubing here. This is what they gave us, a black one here, running up to the three-way valve here. One of them is shut off, the one I'm not using, but the other two here, running 2 tanks off of this, so there's 2 different ways it can go. First way is into my 17-gallon planted aquarium, and the second tube goes into my smaller 5-gallon aquarium, planted aquarium. And so both these tanks are being run off of this one setup here, which is really great. And now we're going to get into the solenoid. So here's all the wiring, and this is the solenoid plug, so I plug the solenoid in here, and as you can see, there is a timer that's attached to the lighting of both of the aquariums, and it's off right now, but I'm just going to quickly turn that on just to show you guys. So that's on now. As you can see, the large tank's on, large aquarium's on here, and we go over to the solenoid, and the solenoid is on, and that's indicated by this red light right there. It's turned on, and that now that it's on, we should be able to see some CO2 flowing in here pretty soon. And there it goes, guys. CO2's flowing. So I got it on a pretty slow flow right now, about maybe a bubble per minute, which is pretty good once it gets going here. And you'll start to see it defuse in a second here. And so the great thing about the solenoid now is that the solenoid can be connected to a timer, which is connected to your lights on the same timer, and therefore when your lights go on, or even before your lights go on, if you wanted to with another timer, a separate timer, the CO2 will automatically go on. So the solenoid basically regulates when the CO2 will be administered to your tank. And that's really great because you don't have to worry and spend that time making sure the bubble count is correct by adjusting the knobs on, if you're using one of those refillable canisters. You can just sit back, relax, and the timers will do their thing. The lights will come on, and when they come on, the CO2 will start up right by itself, and that's all controlled by that solenoid. So that's a great thing to look for when you're buying the solenoid. In conclusion, 20-pound tank was a great investment, and a great investment for you guys if you want to do that, for long-term reliable CO2 at a low cost for refills and low maintenance with the solenoid and a great regulator. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Really hope that you enjoyed this video today. You learned some new things about CO2, CO2 20-pound tanks, and how to up your game in CO2 and have a reliable source of CO2 for years to come at a low cost. Yet again, thank you so much. If you like this, like the video, subscribe to our channel, and more great videos will be coming up soon. Now, the CO2 is working really well.